Welcome. This is Dr. Aaron Sheley. I got my PhD from California Institute of the Arts, as well as a few other universities and institutions. For instance, the American Film Institution gave me a MF, Masters of Fine Arts, and that was achieved only based on merit. That I directed so many films. I'm just coming off of one of my own films, and it was a blast directing. It was a Dungeon Master. But that it dug up things from my other shows that were cool was nice. That sometimes I give them familiar images. Some of the images are fresh off the web and asking me to try and do them for that show. And we thank all the supporters like Wizards of the Coast and all that. Other careers are recommended throughout the film business if they can be sustained by critical type jobs. Well, every job requires a write-up report of what you're doing on the job to make sense out of it, or at least a manual that you've had to read that was written by someone. That writing goes into writing manuals, not just how to write, but write narratively or in story format. We could talk about how mythological structures shape storytelling, like we've said before. And mythological storytelling is kind of a V structure. It's kind of like they're at the top, and then somehow they're down at the bottom, and then they're back at the top. That's usually like the Greek mythology. Now, we also have the idea from Iliad and the Odyssey and other mythologies around that time that there's going to be threshold guardians, and as you approach the inmost cave, as they say, to face the final threshold guardian, they say that you'll have to stop with minor to bigger threshold guardians, and that you achieve something so great as an elixir after the inmost cave is defeated and you return journey home. The journey there has never been so expressed, you see, in cinema than Lord of the Rings. I myself have no penchant to edit those films down to only the walking in the film, but I think we'd like it if we saw it because it still was breathtaking photography. They're still in Australia. The movie doesn't really have a political angle expressible to our own world that fantasy doesn't have to be somewhat allegorical about how we as all stand up for what's right in humanity, a secular humanism type of Lord of the Rings, where man finds it good to stand up for man, whether his ally be weaker or stronger, he'll stand up for him, inequality against adversary, against evil, right? And it's another mythology that comes out of the good versus evil mythology, and that the Bible went for it when every other book was going for it. The good versus evil mythology goes into these books that are supposedly set a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, but they have the same characteristic principles that we have now as human beings, that all humans all over outer space respect other humans. I can appreciate, because if we ran into more humans in outer space, then we'd respect them, right? We wouldn't have to, like, I don't know, it just seems like a thin line that we're not going to cross, but just protect your human alien brother, if you even know they are, because you may not be able to tell. But I took a few films aside that I've been wanting to teach a section on some filmmakers that are right now seemingly more controversial than I really want to teach you about, although I will give you a hint. Caravaggio by Derek Jarman is a must-see, and I say this in every class, and then I've got a message to the class before we move on to these interesting movies we're going to talk about. But Caravaggio, as my godfather, Rashameka, once said, is the only thing I give an A+ to, or it's the only perfect movie, it's the only perfect opera, it's the only perfect thing ever made by man. And of course, the opera and the movie and the book are all different and have very few relations to each other than that they're about Caravaggio. But let's just stick with the movie, because the movie was made by Derek Jarman, and that book became a BFI book, the one on Caravaggio. And I'd thumbed through some pages. It was a really rare BFI book, and they had printed one copy at USC, and so I was looking through it, and it does. Every shot looks like a painting, but when you're watching the film, it's like such a rotating wall of paintings that you're watching, and you're not even sure if Caravaggio is even a painter. You're like, is he an expressive dancer? I mean, it's such a beautiful film, you like forget what it's even about, and the Renaissance and anything, and this gay professor guy who's going the rules of perdition among friends who love each other that die on the road, like My Own Private Idaho or whatever else. And I do wholeheartedly launch right into the rules of the game. Now look at how cool this box set is, and it's got the takeoff thing. And if anyone knows, this is a rare DVD combination of rules of the game. It's a really pristine print. I've seen this copy several times, not to say that it isn't in pristine condition, which I keep all my movies that way. I've rarely ever scratched a disc, and all these discs I've shown you, I bet you'd wondered how the backs would be to them. But like, I'll give you an example, just like a random one, because I never thought about it. But look at the backs of those; they shine, and it's not just my camera not picking up the scratches. It's that these are DVDs, easy to scratch, and that these have been set outside the box every once in a while, but not really every usual. Now, some of my CDs that I play in CD players were scratched intentionally by the band, who, in case I would have all the songs I needed from their CD, then they'd scratch a few, and then they'd hide those tracks from me forever, so the scratches would just take me by, which is why I made another copy without the scratches, but it still recorded the scratchy metal, which is really getting too beyond me, because I just knew that when you scratched it on the signal anyways, it wasn't going to phase right on the computer, but I never done that. I've had it done to me. Well, there's probably a reason. The Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. I'm just joking. None of that prayer stuff here. I was going to say, we pray to the cinema and it comes to us. No, rules of the game. Jokes aside, Renoir was one of the first to be examined by film criticism as an auteur or a craftsman, actually. And craftsmen and auteurs are similar, except craftsmen are more interior basis. They build the set. They build the construct that is the mise en scène, and the montagist is actually usually the auteur, the one that edits across through the film and changes what it means or how it looks by what follows what shot. The rules of the game is interesting because it takes this like Birth of a Nation stance that it is the movie for everyone to see, to learn how to advance film grammar to the next level. And okay, a lot of movies are taking this stance on themselves. This is the new film language. And I think we can all agree that between this and Orson Welles' Citizen Kane, which came a year before and almost makes this one seem a little more dated in comparison. Not really, though, because hear me out. This one's supposed to be poetic realism, rules of the game. The Citizen Kane is supposed to be like industrial, modern, building to this new idea. Isn't so uncommon in the characters' rules of the game who are fighting for their ideals and ideally with the ones they love. And the rules of the game has the guy getting shot that's the wrong guy, like Citizen Kane edited out of that to not be William Randolph Hearst killing Thomas Ince. But now we're somehow supposed to pull the plug on rules of the game because not only do the Nazis want to shut it down, but the Orson Wellesians think that it's a cheap shot at William Randolph Hearst that was never made. I mean, this is already its own criticism. It's coming upon itself by perfectionist Jean Renoir, who'd already made a bunch of movies that were really good, like Grand Illusion, we've talked about before, and it has it all. Grand Illusion, it has. The whole POW escape from camp, can we escape from camp as POWs, is a Grand Illusion. Few years before, and that both the Grand Illusion and Rules of the Game were seized as prints by the German Empire when they conquered France is not very funny considering Hitler wanted those two movies especially destroyed, even though they made no comment towards him, except they said the war effort in Britain is worth it, and France is going to go with the war effort in Britain. And by the time these movies are coming out in America, by 1939, in the end of that year, Charlie Chaplin's finally going to make Great Dictator, and this is the one that really alerts Americans to go. Now, the reason we know Americans were involved with World War II earlier than we think is because Diary of a Nazi Spy, which came out in 1939, and then the censorship office deemed it too anti-German, to which they overruled as an old Birth of a Nation thing. That Birth of a Nation was ruled against as ever being able to portray anything in that racial dislike just based on race. And so the story goes on that Hitler almost destroyed the original print, The Rules of the Game, and he almost destroyed Grand Illusion, and even Ghost Before Breakfast that we talked about last week. But that the Americans didn't get involved until the last minute, and that's why they're dropping bombs and stuff, just as a story that we need to realize is as dated history as his Birth of a Nation, because really, there were already troops in America even by the time they hit with Great Dictator. I mean, Confessions of a Nazi Spy really alerted a lot of soldiers to go check it out, and it was around that time that they were breaking war across in World War II. And John Ford and all those actors and stuff were in the war around that time anyway, so anybody could have told you that, like, around 1942 wasn't the time that the U.S. entered. It was the time that they were pretty much winning by. That it took another 2 years to shut the whole thing down because it was this moving mass of war machinery. Well, that we see played out in Grand Illusion and Rules of the Game, which were probably why Hitler banned them, because they were about the common time, but done in a romantic way. That the only film I've seen almost succeed at doing the bourgeoisie thing of Rules with the Game is The Last Year at Marienbad, where the long takes swoop through the dark castles of Marienbad, and that all these couples are posing together, and that they're all in this, like, these corridor shots that are in the vein of Rene, who does do beautiful corridor shots, and that he'll repeat a corridor shot and everything. But I think it's kind of a deconstruction of Rules of the Game, which I think is more the urtext for the everyone goes out to the mansion to a party, and you can always use the favorite actors of yours to go out there. And Jean Renoir, of course, appears as one of his own characters in his own movie, Rules of the Game. That he's not really in all of his movies is the case. Yes, he rarely does show up in his movies, but Rules with the Game, he needed an ensemble cast. He needed a character like what he could play, where he was an old-time stage orchestrator and dance orchestrator and choreographer, and that he would make these stage plays for people to be entertained. Is all reflected in a scene where he's playing out in the middle of this, like, yard near the garden, and he's just twirling his magic wand as though he's playing before this grand symphony, just because he hears in his own mind the symphony that Jean Renoir, the director, plays enough of for us to hear while he's directing it, although it's like he directs himself, directing the music that the director cues, and there's your self-reflexivity, staring at yourself, and be some kind of lonely director. And that he's the lonely director doesn't mean he doesn't advance on some kind of romance too, because everybody in the story gets a romance, gets some kind of heterosexual romance between couples going on. And I'm not excluding anybody, and the Rules of the Game has plenty of boundaries questioned and things about lies and who's with who and people going which way and that. But the thing is that they're the rich, and these aren't the kind of rich that you reject at the end of the movie as being, like, not knowing what they're doing or messing around too much and just, like, should be closer to each other. No, they're big time. Like, one's an airline flyer and one's like a waitress at a really big restaurant, though, and, like, one's like this soldier, and that they're all these over-the-top images of these people, and that they're off of World War II for a minute because they're coming back either before or after Grand Illusion, that there was no answer by Renoir whether Rules of the Game was supposed to come before Grand Illusion or not, doesn't really soften the blow that they can be watched in either order. Oh, speaking of watched in either order, while this is showing Rules of the Game, while you're all going out to find a copy of this, and there's much better ones on Blu-ray. But I've got to tell you a little truth about my class, that we've been coming right along to our second semester, and that we're in mid-semester, second semester, does make me admit that I'm going to have to adjust things a minor bit and set this class into a few extra classes that we will need to take at the end, because I feel I haven't pegged enough information to even come close to the end, and here we are, about 6 lectures from now we'll be done, but that's not where we're at. We're at, like, a straightaway until we get near to the summer class, or before the spring or fall cutoff. the spring cutoff, right into summer school we're teaching, so we may have enough to fill the space. But I think it's cool that they granted us new episodes, not because they couldn't keep the ones we already had, but because our record booking had said that these 20-minute episodes that I had started with were going to count as a full class. But you can't really count, and excuse me for saying this on the side, students, you can't really count a 20-minute class unless you had like a 40-minute class to pair it with. I mean, you could then do that with a few of them, but somehow it didn't add up to what our original statement was, and we apologize for that because we need more classes anyway, and that we'll end up getting all the extra classes in there, and that you don't have to see this one special to know that we're putting more classes in there. The way we label them, we'll be very careful to add to semester 2 as we go. So we're looking at about 10 more episodes of Masterclass, counting this one, so it'd be 9 to go, right? But that's always what we say behind Masterclass, because that we're teaching them all. Some didn't survive, some were remade over the tops of others, and some aren't showing on my strategy list anywhere. So it seems as though we've underbilled, although we have built so many huge amounts of episodes, more than probably most master classes have done. We're trying to stick with the official school week of doing it, and that I would announce that I put a grand time amount into my dedication towards masterclass and teaching it for Harvard, USC, and CalArts, that I am exactly excited to keep doing this for a long time. So it's not like I'm just going to release 10 more and say this semester's over, which I'm going to say and do. But then I'm going to say, we'll be back for the next semester, and that's going to go on for quite a while. I mean, that I can renew every 4 years. I'll be renewing for every 4 years for a while. I can't say how much or long or what it's going to be like, but that masterclass is pretty much eternal, and then it's the last thing they, promote you to in YouTube above YouTube creators, and that I'm still a YouTube creator is great. But the point is that I'm taking these boxes slowly, and we're going to have other kinds of classes down the road, and we have so much exciting things in the woodworks that aren't just for school, but everything really is for school. And being a research student at CalArts and being a research student there, I can bring back film criticism to their department as notes that are taken worthy from this particular documented film of film criticism. And I already said we don't count this as correcting because it's an autonomous shot, and it's a set that's only built to at least capture what you see is coming from me, and that way you can tell that I'm not like reading from a teleprompter or whatever. But that they have gone and closed captioned our little class here, our big class, our big USC, Harvard, CalArts, let's go with a film school everywhere class. And that I rank it up with the highest 3 film schools in my view is because Harvard doesn't have a film school, but it would have to be a high-end one to start it. And I'm sure USC likes to jumpstart projects like that because USC likes film schools everywhere. And CalArts doesn't just like film schools everywhere. CalArts is film schools everywhere. So I don't really think anybody's going to object that I have to use the strength of all 3 to at least build one and get the other 2 going with units they can get from a professor they can trust who's going to teach them all the way through until there are 16 hours in the first semester, which there already are. But I have to change some of semester 2's back to semester 1. And I defy you to see how I could have done it any other way, not because certain episodes were shredded, but for time's sake, I had already taken the position that the 20-minute sequences would be enough, that you still have to cover those in semester 1. You don't. You only have to cover 16 hours per semester. Now, when we go into the rules of the game, there's a few more things I want to talk about. I want to talk about how, while they are showing the bourgeoisie in the idle class, almost in the vein of Charlie Chaplin's Idle Class, the movie, where he shows the working class hard at work, like in this Metropolis kind of, dystopia, but that the rules of the game only shows the aristocrats who are together on the weekend. And there's one thing about this movie I love the way the montage in the middle captures the fox hunt. And I know Andre Bazin, the great film critic, writer of the Cahiers du Cinema, who wrote about Jean Renoir, said it was a wild montage sequence with all the foxes that they were having the fox hunt with. And then in one shot, you'd see the dude shoot off the shotgun, and then in the next shot, you'd see it either miss or hit the fox. And that they're hitting so many fox makes you wonder if they're really shooting fox in this scene. And here we go. The happiest, most amazing, most integral film of the 20th century, whatever, rules of the game. Everybody needs to see it, to see the new film language as it differs from the D.W. Griffith film language, which I guarantee Bazan mentions that his former craftsman isn't the same as D.W.'s imposition of I'm the angle from the top. Although rules of engagement, rules of the game does bring the camera up top to down low many times, and it does the Jean Vigo poetic realism style good, and that it completely defies the meaning of not being free but bound by a class. The Nazis are already saying it's against them only by never mentioning really that, except for proposing that freedom stands against the Nazis. And that's what Jean Renoir was trying to say in all these opening dialogues of these movies. He was saying Hitler screwed everything up for everybody. He screwed up my movies, and I'm going to release them in the British release, and in the American release, and any release I can get until Hitler will stop the Southern blockade or whatever on these movies, Grand Delusion and Rules of the Game. Now, that they came to so much adversity and were still coming out is a triumph to Western cinema, that they even survived the quake of what was, looking for these films and destroying them by the Third Reich, and the Third Reich was destroying movies. Makes me even wonder why we have to always say that they were such a powerful force we couldn't deal with them, because that's really not totally true about the Americans, who found them a powerful force but could still deal with them. Now, I'm not promoting war or saying prisoner movies or captive soldiers movies are wrong or right or anything, but that the French needed our help with the war is looking like what Grand Illusion, being about World War I, and Rules of Engagement are being typographied for a British and American alliance before something really bad happens. And they're not talking about the wrong guest getting shot. But actually, that is bad for the Army, because he was an Army hero in the movie, gets shot in an accident when it was supposed to be someone else, and then someone else lives. And then the whole love triangle is still problematic, because everybody in Rules of the Game forms a love triangle with one or two others that are in somebody else's love triangle, and they're all in one big interlocking love triangle, and it's so awesome to follow, because you follow girl 1 to guy 1, girl 1 goes to guy 2, girl 2 goes to guy 1, then guy 1 and girl 1 switch, and it's like that every scene. It's like he's keeping track of who everybody is and which relationship is going on with each one, because that's how Renoir's playing it. And there's so many scenes of them coming down in a lit corridor shot, or the scene where they all have only their socks on and they're sliding around the floor of this mansion just in their socks. And it's funny, man. I mean, this movie has lighthearted moments. Those lighthearted moments you'd see that were almost like the vagaries of Vigo, that Vigo or Fouillard would have these sentimental moments, but only in specific ways, not really to sentimentalize their film. And I mean, Hitchcock certainly wasn't as sentimental as Renoir. That he was a skeptic, yes. That he was a stoic cynic, yes. But that Jean Renoir was a hopeless romantic is so obvious here when he's conducting the stage, and that's not even an orchestra at all. It's just something he appears to be conducting. And I think Renoir we owe it a lot to all the way through his film on India, it's like, why do directors have to end on India, like Murnau or Jean Renoir? But his was interesting. It was The River, and it was a remake of another film that he had been part of, and that it was partial documentary, I'm not sure, but that it's a pretty good movie. I liked it. It kind of feels a little fetishistic in the tune of White Savior, but I don't remember exactly. It seems like it was an all-Indian cast, and who am I to say? I just wrote a novel that was all Japanese characters, and there were no like Westerners, as they would say in the movie. And it was really made me want to get down to Ozu movies and go for it. But before we get there, we might as well realize we better get comfy in masterclass here. Everybody get comfy. Because we're going to be teaching a lot more even this semester until basically the semester ends, or a little before that, or a little after that, but hopefully not, because we'll be back for summer school, and then it will all make sense again. We can all take a deep breath, for we have come so far. And I know we've come far to get here, but this is one I had to bring up because I remember last week I brought up Paul Thomas Anderson, and I said, well, you can't have Paul Thomas Anderson without the earrings of Madame D. And that the earrings of Madame D are kind of a Pulp Fiction theme, whereas it's like, you don't know what we've been through with our boss to get you these, put in its place earrings, put in its place this, thing in Pulp Fiction, the briefcase. So if you have a briefcase that you don't know how hard you had to fight for it, but life and death hard several times, the earrings of Madame D follow that same pattern, only that it follows an out of sequence pattern. It does not. That it goes forward in one of those rondo type quartet type Maxo Fools shakes. I will give that Maxo Fool has a really big Lola Monte sized gravestone, and Pierre Lachaise is something everybody needs to know about Maxo Fool, that he was buried in Pierre Lachaise with Jim Morrison and George Méliès, although Maxo Fool's had the bigger gravestone. Gravestone. He didn't have the whole graveyard to himself. No, it kind of looked that way. No. But anyway, The Earrings of Madame D is an incredible movie, because what happens is this really rich aristocratic lover, talk about even more aristocratic than Rules of the Game, like way upper crust. This prince gives his wife, who he's just made his wife, and she's still kind of sleeping around. I mean, she kind of is, but she doesn't care. And he's not really fond of it, but he'll find someone too, right? So that the bourgeoisie, and they're never quite happy with each other, but totally in love with each other. And he gives her earrings, and she gives them to another guy, who gives them to another girl, who the first guy finds that girl with them and decides she can have them since the original girl lost them. Now, before I follow that distinct plot, all the way through The Earrings of Madame D, I just got to say, we're already at 4 twists and turns, and it's already an hour and a half through the film. And I think what's distinctive really about The Earrings of Madame D is that the camera shot is always at that POV, as though it's the POV of the audience needing to see where the earrings are in the shot, and that the camera always follows the earrings, gets close to the earrings, zooms in, flies forward, knocks things off the wall to get to it, but we don't hear it because they make sound differently. But that they're always using the shot to catch up to where the earrings are if they're displayed at that moment. And the film is so where they got the idea from Psycho, where the camera becomes a character and sees the money sitting on the shelf, and sees the bag sitting on the table, and sees the keys to the car and the ripped up note on the table and the toilet. Come on, now we know that camera that's moving is moving at a different pace, like it's going through and seeing what's left of the wreckage of the Psycho stabbing scene. And that all started out with how the camera was moving in on the earrings of Madame D. Now, there are other examples, like in Dr. Mabuse, of things that get close up that needed to be close up. Excuse me, smoker cough. I know I shouldn't smoke as much, and I'm always saying I should. But in Dr. Mabuse, The Gambler, there's 2 movies, and they're Fritz Lang movies, and they're German Expressionism. And they're about this hypnotist who's also a magician, who also is a gambler, that always wins his bets through hypnosis and gambling, and his gypsy ways as a Dr. Mabuse. But that he always brings out things to look at as a swinging camera will go close up to. I mean, almost a swinging camera like the one in Last Laugh, which was harnessed to Emil Janning's back, and it looks like he's flying around with that camera because of how they reverse the set and how they put an acrobat stuntman with the camera on that. And you're just thinking, well, they were experimenting with cameras a lot. The Earrings of Madame D, ironically enough, as though it is a feminist movie, still puts soft focus on the women, like in the classical Hollywood period, that the movie is already set in 1953, isn't like exactly not classifying it as romantic realism, as in the way that the rules of the game is romantic, poetic realism, etc. Now that the earrings of Madame D has the slide shot forward is what I was saying about Dr. Mabuse having many slide shots forward, and there were plenty. And many, I can think of Man of a Movie Camera has that. Man with a Movie Camera has that kind of editing. I can remember that. We won't talk about that too much though, but not for a while, right? Alright, we all understand. Peace be with you all. Alright, well, we got one more to discuss, and this is going to take us, hopefully, to the half-hour marker to explain all of what I'm going to explain, but it can be explained in this dense movie that we're going to cover as the feature that we really want to look into on tonight's episode of Masterclass, that we're teaching much earlier than we thought, and we're admitting to the error of our ways, that you will see plenty of us come back with a vengeance, teaching as many of these courses as we can to as many students as we can, for them all to see 16 of them and then take the final. And for now, I'll leave open the 20-minute courses, but please know that you need to see all the courses of semester 1. If they're marked semester 2, like this one will be, then you can wait until you've seen the first ones if you want, or you can just start in semester 2. There's no real route through it. You just can't combine semester 1 with semester 2, even though we're about to do that for you, so don't really listen to that rule. And that's kind of extremely confusing. If I were to sit here and teach out how to do a class like this, which one day I'll have to sit here and teach out how to do a class like this. But for now, I'm just doing is the class itself, and then I'm giving you a little interior of the class that we've got catch up to do. But Landscape in the Mist is like me. It's very drawn out in the way it answers the question, right? We draw out our answer. It's like nobody asked a question, but it's still the drawn out answer. It's the postmodern condition. It's like, why do we feel so small and infinitesimal when we just made a mountain move with our eyes? And in these Landscape in the Mist is got to be the greatest one of the family and the teenage plot, on the road, lost, homeless, escaping it all, finding everything in Greece, being the La Boheme types, being young, not really sure how to survive, like the Badlands kids, right? Or the Days of Heaven kids. And these guys are going cross country, and that Theo Angelopoulos is one of the best filmmakers of all time, merely because of his long take deep focus. And if you think he doesn't have The Passenger challenged by Antonioni, then you just don't know Theo Angelopoulos, because he's going for the Ho Shaoshin Fuyard Mizoguchi special. And that Mizoguchi is going to come across us constantly as a long takes technician. It's hard to believe, considering Mizoguchi has so much moving information. But that Theo Angelopoulos plays with a clean slate for a variety of reasons, for the most of the part to clear the film and to clear the mind of even the most drastic things that can happen along the trip, that are just like what would happen in reality, but that they filmed it to look that way is not really ghastly, but that the meaning of loneliness, when the girl wants to be with the guy but he realizes he's too old for him. I mean, this is loneliness boiled down to its core heartbreak. And he's advancing through it like it's a long homeless journey that we're on with them. Like, and because we're going with them, we're not going on a fun ride to like an amusement park, which actually, it feels a little like a strange ride barely set up at amusement park, because of all the angles we're getting at them of riding in these different ways. And that it's a road movie nobody can understand, because supposedly Angelopoulos has done road movies, but because Wim Wenders, like with Kings of the Road, is so effective with his road movies, that Angelopoulos is just going to go for his long take movies. If you look carefully, you can see the hand in the air, and I thought that was an interesting scene where they're kind of standing aboard this. The kids from the film that you can see in the picture are standing near the water, and that hand comes lifting out of the water into the sky and into the air. You can tell it's probably one of the shots they shot first, or when they had it ordered to do so, because it would take setting up. Although it looks like it's not set up. And in ways, ancient Greece, that could happen. You could be standing by the water, and a sculpture would float out and be excavated off somewhere. If they let you film it, I'm sure they did. I know Angelopoulos is in good with his Greek government. He doesn't betray them one way or the other. That he's the whole reason that they already have a national cinema, that other Greek films have been made too, but that Angelopoulos captured it with The Weeping Meadow. And The Weeping Meadow reminds me of the Iranian film, The Wind Will Carry Us. And The Wind Will Carry Us reminds me of Angelopoulos' Weeping Meadow, because what they are examinations on peace and quiet and relationships to your family, and the quietness in everything, the quietness in voice, the quietness in time. And though it's not really slowed down and it's kept as this day-to-day modern pace, there's so much interior monologue to Weeping Meadow, which has this ensemble cast of Germans or Greeks that had to leave their homes and go find somewhere else to live, according to the subject. But Landscape in the Mist is just as melancholy, because they're kids. They don't find anywhere. They can't have the Pierre de Fou. They're like the Moonrise Kingdom kids. They're too young for anything, right? That the girl finds the guy very interesting doesn't mean he really ever demeans her. He just can't be with a girl that young, and it's totally responsible in that gauge that there's some bad things that happen to them, and they still keep their ethical values that they grew up with, which again, we're going to be cued as the greater good of man, that you can see the greater good of man being done to everyone. And this also takes the romance, but uses it in a non-classist way by casting the vagabond boheme children now as what would be the nobles of Earrings of Madame G, the very highest up nobles, and following around how her earrings were so high class that they were only given as gifts repeatedly to high class women who would keep ditching it for probably the same pimp. And that John Renoir is so masterful that Max O'Fools is so masterful, and John Renoir is so masterful at his rules of the game, which is pretty much the higher up, the biggest cut, the Freemasons, the ones that control the earth, are having a dinner party, and lo and behold, with or without subconscious inflammation, Jean Renoir has the William Randolph Hearst kills Thomas Ince, a reason by accident, thought he was Charlie Chaplin. But it's all done in code in this movie, and I don't really think they were necessarily vying for Citizen Kane, although Citizen Kane was in a lot of film clubs around the time that Rules of the Game was being made, and that Orson Welles had claimed that Citizen Kane was how you make a film in film language, which may be true in modernism, and Rules of the Game still adheres to this post-classical way of almost, we're going to win the war, and this is our version of Casablanca. It's when French leaders get together to have a day off, and they all fall in love with each other, and then there's a mishap, and everybody goes home. And then Jean Renoir says goodbye to the theater, but that in Landscape of the Mist, it's like an adventure that you never believe you're taking part in, that when you take part in it, it's more inspirational, or as inspirational as any war-torn movie like Empire of the Sun, where Christian Bale finds his way through the hell of the Japanese maze yard of Japan to get out of his living delinquency in his death camps. And that Empire of the Sun is an important film that came out around this time, because there's spectacles, and there's spectacles from the points of view of the young. And I think that both Landscape in the Mist and Empire of the Sun capture the loneliness of being young when no one's around and the war's coming down on you. And I don't mean Greek, even we're at war when this went on, that they're on the war of their own inner peace won't calm down. Just from the madness in the world that's always affected those kind of European countries, like that are so involved with the world trade. And everybody knows that Greek philosophy is so valuable to even translate. I've seen the value of a translation of that, and it's just massive amounts of money go to those translations. And it's probably because all the research has to be done on the various definitions. But I'm getting to the point that Angelopoulos doesn't really do it for the money. How he gets his trick shots and everything are his bag, and he's like Fellini. Although it looks expensive, it really is more cost effective than even Dogma is now to film. And I don't mean the Kevin Smith. I mean the Swedish company. Dogma uses more money than Angelopoulos, who's on the Greek system. Although if you put the net worth together, Angelopoulos' long takes are a study in how net worth increases the longer the take is, because it's taking in everything around it, and if it's moving especially, then it's commenting commercially on everything around it, whether then everything around it is already commenting commercially. So you can see how a big sweeping take could be the commercial of nationalism for the Greeks. That could be how they're selling it, by these big bombastic numbers followed with these horrible feelings of these kids who are lost, who don't know who their parents are going to be, and traveling Greece around all the places they went to Weeping Meadow, And the music of the film, I'm not going to hum it. You always hate when I hum it anyway, but the music to the film is one of the best scores you're going to hear. I know me saying the best is kind of light, because everybody knows that we're going to go into how Superfly is the original script for Pulp Fiction, and argue me not, there is a case for that, although there's a few Tarantino-isms that wouldn't have been in the Superfly. But the point I'm saying is you can count on me saying when the soundtrack is the best. I have a really good soundtrack on one of my films, Go Figure, right? I'm not going to talk about it, but the soundtrack on Landscape in the Mist is about the best soundtrack. It just, like, it's one of those crooning melodies that croons forward and moves forward and rolls over itself like pillows and French horns. It's a beautiful, and then there's kind of this guitar pluck to it. It's just like, it reminds me a lot of the score to In the Mood for Love, which is the film that we talked about by Wong Kar-wai. That is a film set that was made in the year 2000 that has a couple in the film that want to get together, desperately want to get together, but don't want to cheat on their other ones, who are cheating behind their back on each other. Now that the ones that never get together have more love and do get a make-out scene, we all feel almost cathartically involved and arraigned. And one thing we had talked about with Aristotle's Poetics and catharsis is catharsis conflict resolution where there wasn't before? Well, yes, but does that have to be a violent reaction? Not necessarily. Do we get things out of our system from catharsis? Yes, sort of, but only because catharsis is a mechanism that can be gotten there by conflict resolution. It seems as though we've activated the understanding through the story that is conflict resolution, and that's that endorphin that comes along with it, with the climax of a movie. And there's climactic movies all over Landscape in the Mist or Empire of the Sun. And that, like, catharsis also means we get it out of our system. In other words, when the book, the Iliad, finally ends, we've gotten so much rage and violence and things out of our system. Were they in our system before the film, or before the book, excuse me? They were in their system maybe from birth, is what they had thought in the Greeks. So there is a thought that catharsis was like this demon possession, their demon exorcism, excuse me, that you would see a movie and demons would just flee from you. And I tried that once in front of the exorcist, and all my demons fled from me. It was weird. But then they got this weird POV cam of the demons and were taken off and going to make this film called Diary of the Demon, which I can't make anymore, but I'm passing on to my friends at Troma to take Diary of the Demon. And they might not. They might say that's tempting, but you didn't give us a plot roughly enough, even in that. rough time you having on Masterclass. And I'm like, I'm not having a rough time on Masterclass, because now I want to compare and contrast all three, which is what I have been doing. We've got Rules of the Game, Earrings of Madame D, and Landscape in the Mist. Why do I pick romantic melodramas and not just sit here and recommend the first 20 years of actual film history of the silent era, from the teens all through the 20s? There were more melodramas than any other type of film made in Hollywood and wherever else was making films. That Sweden was known for their melodramas is totally true, and that Ingeborg Holm was one of the 1915 films that came out around the time of Birth of a Nation. That was the way film language was designed, and that they had a poetic realism flavor all the way back to Ingeborg Holm, and you can see that in the romantic era of True Heart Susie by D.W. Griffith. And these films that were melodramas all throughout the silent era were even sometimes sword and sandal epics. That Judith of Bethulia kind of emerged from the sword and sandal epic is somewhat true, because that was already a popular Italian genre. But think about this. Judith of Bethulia actually did come out before Cabaret. Now that doesn't make Cabaret not a longer film than even Birth of a Nation, but that the big long film that Griffith released after Enoch Arden, which was 2 parts and would have been a full length if he could have controlled it. It practically was, but he had to release 2 reels of it. So it was like almost 50 minutes long. But the Judith of Bethulia is like over 50 minutes long, over 2 reels long, totally conquers all. And that there's sword and sandal epics around the same time is probably true, but that they weren't as long, or if they were, there probably were, but they weren't Cabaret, which is always the known one, which beat Birth of a Nation by 1914. But Judith of Bethulia by D.W. Griffith was out earlier, was the one about the Hebraic rebellion where they took back Israel. It's a beautiful movie. I would catch it on the internet. You could catch it on my site. And this, if it weren't a war movie in the silent era, or even sometimes in war movies, you have the melodrama theme. Now, what is melodrama? Like, how do we break down melodrama like we break down westerns and gangsters? Because there has to be a way to break it down. So I'm saying sometimes there's domestic, but what we're all using isn't so much domestic melodrama, but romantic melodrama. And so what that means is there's a masculine and a feminine side. And if those can join together, then we have the great romance. The great romance is when your masculine side and your feminine side collide and join each other. And the great romance comes about in many different ways. Like, it can come in the Oedipal form of wanting to be with someone like your mom, or wanting not to have your dad know about things. It's like you have all these issues that are like from mythologies that have like been messiahs inside of us all. That's why we worry about even mentioning prayer, because the messiah complex could come from that. We could think that no, you might not believe this, class, but I'm a faith healer, right? I'm a faith healer, but not everyone's a faith healer, right? Only I heal you through the power of cinema, which, as Aristotle says, if music can cure a plant, then a movie could cure a garden. They didn't say that exactly in Better Homes and Gardens, but I think you're picking my point, because a romantic melodrama melodrama just means an active drama, or that means a current drama, or a modern drama, or a distinctly now drama, or the drama that's taking place in recent history. That it can be a historical melodrama changes that one rule that I just said makes up melodrama. So let's go something into it further. Domestic or romantic, qualify it as something different each time. So now we have to attach the label romantic melodrama onto it, that it makes sense that a domestic melodrama of even Ozu isn't like the samurai or western films of Kurosawa. But let's try it this way. The genre melodrama stands for an averse amount of use of the appeal of both costume, character, cameraman, everything, the appeal of the cinema to be mitigated in terms of its own ability to express drama. And that doesn't make it a film criteria. It's just a film melodrama is the qualifier, because the romantic type is true to film that the subject-object positioning between a man and a woman usually may position the man up front, but that they're given equal time over what creates them as people and what we notice them as people. The woman is given about half the screen time as the man in a romantic. And then in the romance rules of the game, we have the erotic love fulfilled, that there are loves, like there's the love of God, the love of your family, the love of your friends, and the love of the girls you're with or the guys you're with. You're in love with them. So there's the 4 types of love. Now, I'm going to tell you the type of love in these movies is romantic love, but it's critical of romance, and that's definitely key to melodrama. Because if melodrama presents the same kind of romantic sphere that they're all dealing with, then they're all going to come across their threshold guardians in different ways. In this one, it's always trying to figure out who the earrings were passed to and why they didn't have the earrings originally, and didn't they get rid of the earrings? So how did this woman get a hold of my earrings, and are you going to get them back? And then one of them gets killed in a duel, and that one of them gets killed in a duel is a common theme, even among rules of the game. Although it wasn't a duel quite in rules of the game, it was an ambush. And let's be honest, he probably wasn't talking about NC, but if he was, it was subconscious, because that whole story wasn't even coming out until Wells was investigating the William Randolph Hearst case. But I will say, though, that there are a lot of similarities with many things about classical Hollywood cinema in this, as though Renoir had been going to the clubs and learning from them how to do long takes again, and that his takes are more like Wells' Renoir, because he places the characters in forefront or back front or both. Deep focused long take that you can see the focus in the background. That Angelopoulos takes these rules of the game shots and these earrings of Madame D point of view shots at the earrings and takes them all into some of the longest takes you're ever going to run into in cinema. I mean, I've watched Ho Shao Shin, and the takes get really long. Like you kind of just slowly go through the takes. Oh, sorry, I'm falling asleep. No, I'm just kidding. These movies won't make you fall asleep. Make sure you watch all 3 of these till you get caught up in this class. No, actually, just listen to the lecture, hear the lecture. If it inspires you to see something like this, find it. I know it's hard to find. I know this Landscape in the Mist was a really hard to track down, really out of print DVD. I shouldn't even be showing you these, because sometimes I feel like I went the extra mile to get Earrings of Madame D, and I'm more happy about my collection than I'm able to share with you the meanings of these films and what all they desire. And that even Madame D didn't please all the film critics. Even the feminine film critics were like, but we're still trying to buy her off as though she's less important than the object that we're trying to tell her she's as valuable as, which may be more valuable than her, but nobody really gets them, because everybody goes down with the ship trying to get them. That Landscape in the Mist, they don't even get so lucky as to be in the aristocracy of the rules of the game, let alone Madame D, that they're not in France anymore, they're in Greece, and Greece is broke than ever. That we see France getting broke with Godard and Truffaut, but they were going broke honestly, like Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin would, with all the extravagances of going broke. But that Angelopoulos has had to time every minuscule detail and distance and phrasing of not only the film, but the film used along with the music in every shot, making the images almost pure cinema. And that the dialogue is sparse, but is in Greek. Doesn't mean there aren't subtitles. And we have all kinds of rave reviews on the back of this box. This is the New Yorker video box. Listen to this. It says, it's dreamlike. The film has the magical quality of Fellini and the humanism of Truffaut. That's David Armstrong in the San Francisco Examiner. Highly recommended. A modern masterpiece, breathtaking images. No movie lover should ever consider missing it. This is Landscapes in the Mist, and I totally agree. I remember the one last story I'll tell, and then we'll close up Masterclass, is that there was one time I was going after this film because I had to review it I had to find a film review for Entertainment Today, which was a magazine I was working for years ago, and I was used as art film of the week so many times that it was great that it would just become this ongoing, constant column that I would either write more to or had sent more to or more had gotten there and that they'd used them as reviews. And all these reviews were published for me in these like million issue magazines that they're doing in LA. And it's cool. But I remember having to review Landscape in the Mist, and you can still find this Landscape in the Mist at the Entertainment Weekly site with my name on the article. And it's this article that I just really researched. I really went into it. I ordered Landscape on the Mist on Netflix while I was ordering the movie itself, so which one got there first. And they both got there at the same time, and I'm sitting here ripping them open and doing justice by watching the one that I found. And I told my editor, I was like, I found that film, Landscape in the Mist, you know how it was out of print and you couldn't get to it, and I was getting it on Netflix somehow. All of a sudden, it was green lighted on Netflix, like they were really going to send it in 2 weeks. But I just around that 2 week time had gotten this DVD that I'm showing you before, and that sometimes these boxes disappear and go into Never Neverland. And I hope it's just the crew at Sigma who just borrowing them and returning them. No, they don't do that without my permission, but they have my permission, to borrow. And you watch the movie, and it has to come back in its exact unscratched format. We're going to look at another disc here and see how that Landscape in the Mist I've had out of its sleeve a few times. It doesn't have the most easy to open box, but if you look at the back, it's technically, you can tell it was a brand new one, and it's technically unflawed by scratch or anything. That this is the Landscape in the Mist. It's in completely mint condition. Most of these movies are in mint condition, not just because the Criterion packages them so well that keeps them so durable and really easy to archive in a collection, is something that you think about when you think about movies like this and how they're collector's items and how they get out to theaters and how they get out to art theaters, and then how somehow someone will come along on how these movies and books that became movies and all the cinema that is coming from all these different sources is becoming the post-classical to the modern, to the very modern image, all the way to the postmodern. And I don't put Landscape in the Mist really in the postmodern realm, only because while that it seems writerly and somewhat like controllable as you look around and scan the shot with your eyes, but Landscape in the Mist isn't really interactive in the way that you can still, you can take it to the end or take it to the beginning and edit it yourself to make any film interactive. Any film is going to be interactive if you take it and edit it yourself out of the cut that they even have. You can change it. Nobody does that much because you can't really show those to anyone unless you had the license for the film, but that you can recut. Yeah, so it is all interactive if that's allowed, which they don't really allow that. The Landscape of the Mist, I don't think. I think it's on some kind of copyright with the New Yorker films, that it's really rare to even see pictures of it or see theories of it or hear that it was in an Entertainment Today article. That this Landscape in the Mist was finally tracked down by my editor boss, and he thought it was awesome. He thought, I had never heard of it. Aaron's writing a review on it. Suddenly here it is in the Village Voice Top 100, so everyone's got to like it, right? And Matt Klickstein, my boss at the time of Entertainment Today, he goes, I really like that. That was a really good movie. I'm glad you reviewed that one. And you reviewed that one without owning it or with owning it or having not seen it. I was like, no, I chanted a mantra and it appeared before me. You just joke about that stuff. But no, like we tracked them down at just about bare knuckles, same time, bro. We both hit the buzzer at the same time. I think he had Landscape in the Mist beat like right around the same 10 minutes. I got the DVD and I'd seen it somehow, probably even because of some screener he'd sent me before, but he was sending me screeners and somehow it overlapped, and I didn't have my Landscape in the Mist screener that he hadn't seen yet. And it's a longer story than even that. There are adventures in criticism. If you get mixed up in the criticism game, I'll tell you one thing that's great about being a film critic is you can get into a lot of clubs that need film criticism. So if you bring like a film critic book to the table and you're in some club like Rolling Stone, they're listening because most movies have like a rock and roll score these days, or they'll often do. But if you bring things to these companies that are really of high value, then they might not reject you on the basis that they're looking for this kind of material anyway. So we advance anyone in the arts making movies because of seeing movies like this that are self-reflexive in themselves, but that make us want to make a movie. And I'm not saying that like Landscape in the Mist and Rules of the Game, Earrings of Madame D are mainly poised on making cinema, but the rules of the game, to me, doesn't that sound like something a director would do, is promote the rules of the game, and the Renoir's rules of the games are the director's rules of the game, except for the Wellesian kind and the D.W. Griffith one that's merging into this rules of the game of a title that sounds like the type of movie that it's promoting, those rules for all movies. Well, that's interesting. And it's interesting that with Earrings of Madame D, we follow the earrings around, and by this time we're through the third cycle, we know that this time the brutal gun battle is going to lead to Madame D's death. And that's what I'm saying about the feminists with these films, is that the feminist isn't totally satisfied by Earrings of Madame D, again, because it's like Madame D is being bought with the earrings, that she should have been more valuable than the earrings is a thought the camera doesn't allude, but that the camera doesn't allude it intentionally is already controversial. And I'm going to end with this. I know a couple of times back there we got trailed off and talked about a few other things, but I'm not saying that, like, Godard makes the same kind of films as Angelopoulos, because Godard uses a lot of montage. And that Theo Angelopoulos is veering into the postmodern world was the point I left you with. But it's modernist in this film because the children are alone. There's three of them. They can kind of talk together. They usually never talk. To get into a little bit of bad trouble, everybody's okay. It gets interesting and becomes this journey across Greece for the vagabonds, and that everybody in those other movies were rich. These guys don't have anything, and they just have to travel where they will, with who they will, and wherever they may roam. And Wherever They May Roam is a good Metallica song. And I like Landscape in the Mist, that I'd seen the film right when my mentor had told me my review was so good, I almost told him watching it again makes it seem like a whole new movie. And there's that movie they always say by Jacques Tati, Playtime, that it's never the same movie twice. Landscape in the Mist is about the same every third time, and then after every third time it changes movement. It's not just how they place the camera in editing, it's how you recognize the subtitles for what they are after you've already read them once. Your brain reads them faster, even if you're not like memorizing them, which that's too much to memorize. If all these films I showed you, which are subtitled. And do me a favor, if you watch subtitled movies, tell your friends that, like, after about the seventh movie that's in subtitled that you see, and you're going to need to watch subtitled films at some point if you're going to be a film student. And the subtitles don't seem like they're there in the way that they don't seem like they're there in Star Wars when aliens are talking alien talk. And I hate to use this as a stereotype, but just hear me out. That the aliens are always quoted what they're saying in English across the bottom of the screen in subtitles is never complained about. So I'm not going to complain about it in a real movie where they're really using language from another country. And I know we all have struggles with not admitting that there's the rest of the world out there. And who knows, there may be some countries that have that isolationist approach that think they're the only ones out there. But we know there's other countries and that, like, they produce great cinema, the rules of the game. Madame D, they were showing, and Landscape in the Mist, all these films were festival type films that they were showing off in America long after the Nazis didn't destroy any of them. And the Earrings of Madame D and Landscape in the Mist were post-war films. And that Madame D is barely a post-war, but just right on the edge of post-war. And the rules of the game is in the trenches again, but it is relieving to know that they could still go on the controversial fox hunt. Now, if real foxes are being tampered with, I'm pretty desperate to now want to say that film is condemned, because there isn't supposed to be any type of cruelty to animals in the film, and it almost looks realistic. That I've read a book that says they make it look real is enough to put me in a little bit of allowance by letting rules of the game meander out there, and it being one of the best montages, and that I guess fox hunts are pretty common in France. Doesn't exactly excuse it. And I think that if you don't want to see it's a really great masterpiece of a film, but you might want to. And I know every critic, like Pauline Kael, every critic wrote about how good the fox hunt scene was. But I'm going to tell you, as a critic, it almost condemned the movie for me, because it was like one of those animals getting killed type moments that I was kind of uneasy for. And I know Rinma's trying to make you feel uneasy, but that he did it over a fox hunt is almost enough to want to yak afterwards. No, not that bad, but it's really like, do we have to be hit that hard by metaphor? And then, Earrings of Madame D, are objectives the object of the object? Are they the object of attention beside the person who was the subject and is now objectified, but not of the importance of an object that is greater value than her own life, which makes no sense, because wouldn't that actually add to the value of her own life? I'm not sure. And so we've covered it, and then we get the same kind of premise of loneliness and heartbreak and romance, and that romantic melodrama, that erotic love, the eros between a man and a woman and a man, or it can be, eros can also stand for homosexuals and bisexuals, but eros is between a lover and the other lover, and they're usually man and woman traditionally, even sort of in Landscape in the Mist, although all traditions are questioned in all of them. It has the male and the female, and usually in the classic, the object is the woman and the subject is the male. In the modern, everybody's a subject, and the object is the broken heart. In the modern, it always has to be something that can't work out, that would have worked out otherwise, but can't work out. And you get these expressionistically exaggerated versions out of these from James Bond and all the women that he romantically, melodramatically engages in his spy films that are straight out of Hitchcock's North by Northwest, or even better, Saboteur, one of those Pickerel structures where the guy is going on an adventure all over the world and barely leaves his house to do it. And trust me, that's what I'm going to do. Well, we've stretched over time, and you only had to see about an hour of that, but I hope we spelled it out over those 3 movies, why you should see them, why you'll get used to it after 7 tries of a foreign film. You'll start getting used to reading the subtitles so fast that it'll be like during Jabba's palace, when we can all memorize what the subtitles say, right? So no complaints on subtitles, or I'll tisk you with my Star Wars subtitled rule. And don't get me that all the aliens speak either are translated into English, in the American version, which, yeah, so if the aliens don't speak French or German, they're translated into that, but that the heroes of the story speak English and they're in outer space, priceless, dude, because that means that the aliens are on an off version of English originally, and that some of the aliens speak English in some of the other episodes is already like saying that the rebels of the galaxy, of course, what else are they going to speak? English? Now, this isn't colonialism. This is the nature of sci-fi. The nature of sci-fi being that the humans would have had to have made some kind of obligation for the Earth and gone through some kind of negotiation for an Earth to interact with it to help it out. Because actually, before we go, there's a research question that says, would all the animals and plant life on the planet succeed without humans? Well, I know humans produce a lot of waste and have killed some life and have messed up the ozone, but because of animals living in a biosystem, and a biosystem being the bigger animal has less of a biosystem measurement, because there's 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 big whales like it, and then there's millions or billions of plankton that they have to eat to stay as big as they are, and that, like, That's biomass. And if one thing in the circle of life was disrupted, I think if humans were taken off the planet, hear me out, I don't necessarily know if animal life and plant life would go on without us. I used to think, oh yeah, everybody agrees that if the human was gone. But this is a thinker, because it's like, I've seen these post-apocalyptic movies, and really it's like if all the humans were gone, it would probably fall to ruin, and somewhere in the biomass, the link we are to whatever animal we are in whatever phase of us, and that we don't even know about, except that we produce enough carbon dioxide or something from this bug to live that needs to help this animal live by, feeding it. I mean, if we're not disrupting the system by being gone, then how do we even alter nature for the better, for the worse? And we don't alter it for the better. That altering it would be for the worse, but that actually would communicate with the animal better, put the animal ahead of us, and then we go on from there. And so if we're putting all these animals ahead of us and have all these veterinarians in places that are feeding animals, whether they were once domesticated or not, makes me wonder if it would be okay to say that the animals do come first in the setting. And what I'm getting at is that the animals are treated better in this film, and in, say, Electrocution of an Elephant and the fox hunt, they look like the fact that they're either using the real thing, or in Electrocution's case, or mincing it to where it looks like it's real in Rules of the Game. And I think we got the Humane Society over that to say, well, it was edited so well, and these shots that are edited so well may be good, but it almost put me on the back burner as to whether we should allow an animal like that to get shot. And so I'm being this very cautious towards the animal kind of guy, because now I'm like, if humans did fall off the planet, the life and the animal may not survive. And we'll leave you with that, Masterclass. I hope you got teary-eyed at the end. I know I sure did. No, I'm kidding. We'll be okay. We'll talk later.